The night everything fell apart started like any other. I was nursing a whiskey at the bar, my third of the evening, watching the glittering crowd of fashionalites mingle at yet another corporate party. My wife, Lily, was somewhere in the throng, probably charming the pants off some unsuspecting executive. That's what she did best these days. "Another round, sir?" the bartender asked, eyeing my empty glass. I nodded, pushing it towards him. "Make it a double." As he poured, I caught a glimpse of Lily across the room. She was radiant in a slinky red dress that hugged every curve, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in perfect waves. But it wasn't her beauty that caught my attention. It was the man she was talking to. Mr. Wilson, the CEO of the fashion brand that threw this party, was leaning in close, his hand resting on the small of her back. I knocked back the fresh whiskey in one gulp, wincing at the burn. How had we gotten here? Just a year ago, Lily was still recovering from a car accident that had shattered her confidence along with her leg. Now she was the belle of every ball, and I was the husband left in the shadows. "David," a voice called out, breaking me from my brooding. I turned to see my colleague Tom, approaching with a grin. "There you are, man. I've been looking all over for you. The boss wants to introduce you to some big shots from New York." I plastered on a smile, straightening my tie. "Lead the way." As Tom guided me through the crowd, I couldn't help but glance back at Lily. She was laughing at something Mr. Wilson said, her head thrown back, exposing the elegant line of her throat. The sight made my stomach churn. The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes and small talk. I nodded and smiled at all the right moments, but my mind was elsewhere. When I finally managed to excuse myself, I headed straight for Lily, determined to remind her who she came here with. But as I approached, I overheard a snippet of their conversation that stopped me in my tracks. "Would be honored if you consider being my companion at these events," Mr. Wilson was saying, his voice low and intimate. "You have a natural grace that would be perfect for our brand image." Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Oh, Mr. Wilson, I don't know what to say. It's such an incredible offer." "Please call me Jack," he insisted, his hand moving from her back to her arm. "And there's no need to decide right now. Think about it, talk it over with your husband if you'd like." I cleared my throat loudly, making my presence known. Lily jumped slightly, turning to face me with a guilty expression. "David." "There you are, honey," she said, her voice a little too high. "Have you met Mr. Wilson?" I extended my hand, gripping perhaps a bit too tightly. "We've met briefly. Nice to see you again, sir." Mr. Wilson's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Likewise, David. You have a charming wife here." "Yes, I'm aware," I replied coolly. "If you'll excuse us, I need to borrow her for a moment." Without waiting for a response, I took Lily's arm and led her away from the crowd, towards a quiet corner of the room. "What the hell was that?" I hissed once we were out of earshot. Lily pulled her arm free, her eyes flashing. "What was what?" "We were just talking." "Just talking. He had his hands all over you." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic, David. He was being friendly." "Friendly?" I scoffed. "He was practically undressing you with his eyes. And what's this about being his companion at events?" Lily's face lit up. "Oh, isn't it exciting? He thinks I have potential as a brand ambassador. Can you imagine? Me representing a major fashion label." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "And what about your job? What about our life?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud. This could be a great opportunity for us. Think of the connections, the lifestyle." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Lily, you can't be serious. You're talking about completely upending our lives for some fantasy." Her eyes narrowed. "It's not a fantasy, David. It's a chance to be something more than just your wife. Don't you want that for me?" The words stung more than I cared to admit. "I thought you were happy with our life," I said quietly. Lily's expression softened slightly. "I am, but don't you ever want more? To feel important, to be admired?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw the woman I fell in love with, vulnerable, hopeful, and a little scared. But then I remembered the way she laughed with Mr. Wilson, the way she leaned into his touch, and the moment passed. "We'll talk about this at home," I said firmly. "For now, let's just get through this party." Lily nodded, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. As we made our way back to the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of forced smiles and stilted conversation. When we finally made it home, Lily headed straight for the bedroom without a word. I poured myself another drink and settled onto the couch, my mind racing. Over the next few weeks, things between Lily and me were tense. She started spending more time out of the house, always with vague explanations about meetings and networking events. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office more often than not. One evening, about a month after the party, I came home early, hoping to surprise Lily with dinner and maybe clear the air between us. But when I walked in, the apartment was empty. On the kitchen counter, I found a note. "Out with friends. Don't wait up. Evel." Sighing, I've opened the fridge and grabbed a beer. As I was about to close the door, something caught my eye. Pushed to the back, behind the milk and leftovers, was a garment bag. Curious, I pulled it out. Inside was a dress I'd never seen before, a shimmering, barely there number that looked more like lingerie than evening wear. My stomach dropped as I realized what this meant. Lily wasn't just going to meetings, she was living a whole other life that I knew nothing about. I was still standing there, holding the dress, when I heard the front door open. Lily walked in, looking stunning in a sleek black outfit I'd also never seen before. She froze when she saw me. "David, I didn't expect you home so early." I held up the dress. Care to explain this? Her face paled, then flushed with anger. "You went through my things." "It was in the fridge, Lily. The fridge. What the hell is going on?" She snatched the dress from my hands. "It's nothing. Just something for work." I laughed bitterly. "Work? Since when does your job at the marketing firm require clothes like this?" Lily's chin jutted out defiantly. "Things change, David. I've been exploring new opportunities." "With Mr. Wilson?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. She didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. Lily sighed, sinking onto the couch. "It's not what you think. Jack, Mr. Wilson, he's been introducing me to people in the fashion world. I've been attending some events, that's all. Events that require you to dress like this." I gestured at the barely there dress. "It's fashion, David. You wouldn't understand." The dismissive tone in her voice ignited something in me. "You're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how my wife can lie to me for weeks, sneaking around behind my back. I don't understand how you can throw away our life together for some cheap thrills with a man old enough to be your father." Lily stood up, her eyes flashing. "It's not cheap thrills. This is my chance to be someone, to make a name for myself. Why can't you be happy for me?" "Happy?" I laughed incredulously. "Happy? You want me to be happy that my wife is parading around in next to nothing, hanging off the arm of some sleazy CEO?" Lily's face contorted with rage. "Jack is not sleazy. He sees potential in me, something you clearly don't." We stood there, glaring at each other, the air thick with tension. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and controlled. "If that's how you feel, maybe he should go stay with your new friend Jack." Lily's eyes widened in shock. "What?" "You heard me," I said, turning away. "I need some time to think. And clearly, you've already made your choice." I heard her intake of breath, sharp and pained. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might fight for us. But then I heard the rustle of fabric as she gathered her things, followed by the slam of the front door. The silence that followed was deafening. I spent the next few days in a daze, alternating between anger, hurt, and disbelief. Lily didn't come home, and I didn't reach out. I threw myself into work, stay in the office until the cleaning staff kicked me out each night. It was a week later, on Halloween, that everything came to a head. I hadn't planned on going out, but my colleagues insisted I join them for drinks at a trendy new club downtown. "You need to get out of your head, man," Tom said, clapping me on the back. "Come on, it'll be fun." Reluctantly, I agreed. We arrived at the club around 10 p.m., the line already stretching around the block. But Tom knew the bouncer, and we were ushered in quickly. The interior was a sensory overload, pulsing music, flashing lights, and bodies pressed together on the dance floor. We made our way to the bar, where I ordered a double whiskey, neat. As I sipped my drink, my eyes scanned the crowd. And that's when I saw her. Lily was on the dance floor, wearing a costume that left little to the imagination. She was dressed as some kind of sexy angel, with tiny white feathered wings, a corset that pushed her breasts up to her chin, and a skirt so short it barely covered her ass. But it wasn't her outfit that made my blood run cold. It was who she was dancing with. Mr. Wilson, dressed as a devil, how fitting, I thought bitterly, had his hands on my wife's hips, pulling her close as they moved to the music. Lily's arms were around his neck, her head thrown back in laughter. I felt like I was going to be sick. "David," Tom's voice seemed to come from far away. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." Without answering, I downed the rest of my drink and pushed my way through the crowd. As I approached Lily and Mr. Wilson, I saw her eyes widen in recognition and then fear. "David," she gasped, quickly disentangling herself from Mr. Wilson. "What are you doing here?" I ignored her, focusing instead on the man beside her. "Having fun, Mr. Wilson?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "David, this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I cut him off. "Because it looks like you're groping my wife in the middle of a crowded club. Please tell me what I'm misunderstanding here." Lily stepped between us, her face flushed. "David, stop it. You're making a scene." I laughed bitterly. "I'm making a scene. That's rich, coming from you." Mr. Wilson cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take this somewhere more private." "No," I said firmly. "I think I've seen everything I need to see." With that, I turned and walked away, ignoring Lily's calls behind me. I pushed through the crowd, desperate for fresh air, for space to think. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. I leaned against the wall of the club, trying to catch my breath, to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. A few minutes later, Lily burst out of the club, her ridiculous wings askew. "David, wait." I straightened up, facing her. "What, Lily? What could you possibly have to say?" She reached for me, but I stepped back. "It's not what you think," she pleaded, her eyes wide and desperate. "Jack and I were it's just business." I scoffed. "Business? Is that what they're calling it these days?" Lily's face crumpled. "Please, David, let me explain." For a moment, I was tempted. A part of me wanted to hear her out, to believe that there was some innocent explanation for all of this. But then I remembered the way she looked at Mr. Wilson, the way she'd been lying to me for weeks, and my resolve hardened. "There's nothing to explain, Lily," I said coldly. "I think I've seen everything I need to see." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in her ridiculous angel costume. As I hailed a cab, I could hear her calling my name, her voice breaking, but I didn't look back. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into work, staying at the office until the early hours of the morning. When I did go home, I'd find messages from Lily on the answering machine, each one more desperate than the last. I deleted them without listening. It was on the 4th day after Halloween that I decided to take action. If Lily wanted to play games, I could play too. I started by updating my social media profiles. I changed my relationship status to "It's complicated" and posted a few carefully selected photos of myself at work events, always with attractive female colleagues nearby. I made sure to tag them, knowing Lily would see. Then I reached out to an old girlfriend, Sarah. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and I knew she was single. I invited her out for coffee, making sure to post a selfie of us together with a vague caption. Catching up with an old friend. Sometimes the past holds the key to the future. It was petty, I knew, but a part of me wanted Lily to feel the same pain and confusion I'd been experiencing. The effect was almost immediate. Lily started calling more frequently, leaving longer messages. I could hear the panic in her voice. David, please, we need to talk about this. What's going on with you and Sarah? Please, just call me back. I didn't. Instead, I continued my campaign. I started going out more, always making sure to document my nights out on social media. I flirted shamelessly with women at bars, not because I was interested, but because I hoped word would get back to Lily. It was childish and beneath me, but I couldn't seem to stop. The hurt and anger I felt had twisted into something ugly, and I wanted Lily to feel it too. About a week into this behavior, I received a text from Mr. Wilson. It was brief and to the point. We need to talk. Meet me at my office tomorrow at 2 p.m. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. What could he possibly have to say? The next day, I found myself in the opulent lobby of Wilson Fashions. The receptionist, a willowy blonde who couldn't have been more than 22, eyed me suspiciously. Mr. Wilson is expecting you, she said, gesturing towards the elevator. Top floor. The ride up felt interminable. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into a sleek, modern office. Mr. Wilson was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city. David, he said, turning to face me. Thank you for coming. I didn't bother with pleasantries. What do you want, Wilson? He sighed, gesturing for me to sit. I remained standing. I wanted to clear the air, he said, his voice carefully neutral. What you saw on Halloween? It wasn't what it looked like. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because it looked like you were all over my wife. Mr. Wilson had the grace to look uncomfortable. Lily and I, our relationship is purely professional. She's been working as a brand ambassador for us, attending events, networking. Nothing more. And the dancing, the costumes, that's all professional too. He cleared his throat. The party got a bit out of hand, I'll admit, but I assure you, there's nothing untoward going on between Lily and myself. I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. Why are you telling me this? Mr. Wilson's expression softened slightly. Because Lily is a valuable asset to our company, but more importantly, she's clearly distraught about the situation with you. She's been unfocused, emotional. It's affecting her work. I felt a surge of anger. So you're concerned about her productivity? That's why you called me here. Mr. Wilson held up his hands placatingly. No, that's not. Look, David, I may be a businessman, but I'm not heartless. Lily talks about you constantly. She's clearly in love with you, and this situation is tearing her apart. I wanted to believe him, but the image of Lily in that angel costume, laughing in his arms, was burned into my mind. If she cared so much, why did she lie to me? Why did she hide all of this? Mr. Wilson sighed, running a hand through his hair. From what Lily's told me, she was afraid you wouldn't understand. That you'd see this opportunity as frivolous or beneath her. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I really made Lily feel that way? Had I been so dismissive of her dreams that she felt she had to hide them from me? I need some time to think, I said, my voice suddenly hoarse. Mr. Wilson nodded. Of course, but David, if I can offer some advice, talk to your wife. Really talk to her. You might be surprised by what you learn. I left his office in a daze, my mind reeling. As I stepped out onto the busy street, I pulled out my phone. There were 3 missed calls from Lily and a text. David, please, we need to talk. I can't go on like this. I'll be at home all day. Please come by when you're ready. I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Finally, I typed out a response. I'll be there in an hour. The drive home felt both interminable and far too short. My emotions were a tangled mess. Anger, hurt, confusion, and underneath it all, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fix this. When I arrived at our apartment, I hesitated before using my key. Should I knock? It felt strange to knock at my own door, but walking in unannounced didn't feel right either. In the end, I compromised, turning the key slowly to give Lily time to hear me coming. As I stepped inside, I saw her sitting on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. It was clear she'd been crying. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came." I nodded, closing the door behind me. "We need to talk." Lily stood up, taking a tentative step towards me. "I'm so sorry, David, for everything. The lies, the sneaking around. I never meant to hurt you." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Then why did you do it, Lily? Why couldn't you just be honest with me?" She sank back onto the couch, her shoulders slumping. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you'd think it was stupid, that you wouldn't support me. And then, when it started to become real, I was afraid of how you'd react if you knew I'd been lying." I moved to sit in the armchair across from her, maintaining some distance between us. "Did I really make you feel like you couldn't talk to me about your dreams?" Lily looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "No, yes, I don't know. It's not that you ever said anything specific. It's just, you've always been so focused on your career, on climbing the corporate ladder. I felt like my interest in fashion and networking were frivolous in comparison." Her words stung, but I forced myself to really listen. Had I been so wrapped up in my own ambitions that I'd made Lily feel small? "I never meant to make you feel that way," I said softly. "I've always wanted you to be happy, to pursue your passions." Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know that now. But at the time, it just seemed easier to keep it separate. And then one lie led to another, and before I knew it, I was living this double life." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our miscommunications hanging heavy in the air between us. Finally, I spoke. "I talked to Mr. Wilson today." Lily's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and a hint of fear. "You did? What? What did he say?" I leaned back in the chair, studying her reaction. "He said that your relationship was purely professional, that there's nothing going on between you two." Relief flooded her face. "It's true, David. I swear to you, there's nothing romantic between Jack and me. He's been a mentor, a guide in the fashion world, but that's all." I wanted to believe her, but the image of them dancing together on Halloween still nagged at me. "And the party? The way you were dancing with him?" Lily's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "That was a mistake. I got caught up in the moment, in the excitement of it all. I'd had a few drinks, and I'm so sorry, David. It meant nothing, I promise you." I nodded slowly, processing her words. "Lily, I need you to understand something. The lying, the sneaking around, that hurt more than anything else. I can handle you having ambitions, pursuing new opportunities, but I can't handle dishonesty." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know. God, David, I know. I've been sick with guilt over it. I want to make this right, to earn back your trust. Please tell me how I can do that." I took a deep breath, considering my next words carefully. I think we need some time apart." Lily's face crumpled. "What? No, David, please." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "I'm not saying it's over, Lily, but I need some space to think, to process everything that's happened. And I think you need some time to figure out what you really want, from your career and from our marriage." She nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Where will you go?" "I'll stay with Tom for a while," I said. "I'll come by in a few days to pick up some clothes and things." As I stood to leave, Lily rushed towards me, grabbing my hand. "David, wait. I love you. You know that, right? No matter what's happened, that's never changed." I looked down at our joined hands, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I love you too, Lily. That's why this hurts so much." With that, I gently disentangled my hand from hers and walked out the door, leaving my heart behind. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra projects. Anything to keep my mind off the emptiness of my life without Lily. Tom was a good friend, giving me space when I needed it and dragging me out for beers when he sensed I was spiraling. But even his well-meaning efforts couldn't fill the void Lily had left. I found myself obsessively checking social media, looking for any updates from Lily. Her posts were few and far between, a stark contrast to her usual active presence. When she did post, it was mostly work-related, photos from fashion events, always perfectly posed and professional. There was no hint of the carefree, laughing woman I'd seen dancing with Mr. Wilson. As for me, I stopped my childish game of trying to make Lily jealous. I removed my relationship status altogether and stopped posting anything personal. If Lily was checking up on me, she'd find nothing but bland work updates and the occasional shared article. It was about a month into our separation when I received a text from Lily that made my heart race. "I have some news. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow?" Our usual place, 2 p.m. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind racing with possibilities. What kind of news? Had she decided she wanted a divorce? Had she gotten some big break in her fashion career? Or was it something else entirely? After what felt like hours, I finally typed out a reply. "I'll be there." The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop early, my nerves jangling. I ordered my usual black coffee and found a table in the corner, away from the windows. As I waited, I couldn't help but remember all the happy moments Lily and I had shared in this very spot. Lazy Sunday mornings, quick meetups during busy work weeks, celebrations of small victories. The memories brought a bittersweet ache to my chest. At exactly 2 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, and Lily walked in. My breath caught in my throat. She looked different somehow, not in any obvious physical way, but there was a new air about her. She seemed more confident, more self-assured, but also softer somehow. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on me. A small smile tugged at her lips as she made her way over. "David," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. Up close, I could see the faint shadows under her eyes, expertly concealed with makeup, but still visible to someone who knew her face as well as I did. "Can I get you something?" I asked, gesturing towards the counter. She shook her head. "No, thank you. I can't stay long." My heart sank at her words. Whatever this news was, it seemed she didn't want to linger. "So," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You said you had news?" Lily took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly on the table in front of her. "Yes, I have made some decisions, David. About my career, about us." I braced myself, sure that whatever came next would shatter the fragile hope I'd been nurturing. "I've decided to step back from the fashion world," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I've told Mr. Wilson that I can't continue as a brand ambassador." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't one of them. "What?" "But I thought this was your dream." Lily smiled sadly. "I thought it was too. But these past few weeks, being away from you, it's made me realize what's really important. The glamour, the parties, the attention. It was all exciting, but it was empty. It cost me the one thing that truly matters, us." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "Lily." She held up a hand, stopping me. "Please let me finish. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of soul-searching. I realized that I got caught up in the excitement of it all, in the idea of being someone important. But in chasing that, I lost sight of who I really am and who I want to be." I listened, barely daring to breathe as she continued. "I want to be your wife, David. I want to be the person you can trust, the person you can share your life with. I want to build a future with you, not as some fashion icon or socialite, but as me. Just Lily." Tears were streaming down her face now, and I realized my own cheeks were wet. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice breaking. I know I betrayed your trust, and if you can't forgive me, I'll understand. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making this right. To being honest, to being the partner you deserve. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The emotions swirling inside me were too intense, too complex to put into words. Finally, I managed to find my voice. Lily, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I even know what to say. She squeezed my hand, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. You don't have to say anything right now. I know I've dropped a lot on you. I needed you to know where I stand. The ball's in your court now, David. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I nodded, my mind reeling. I need some time to process this, I said honestly. Lily gave me a watery smile. Of course, take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. With that, she stood up, hesitating for a moment before leaning down to place a soft kiss on my cheek. Then she was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and a whirlwind of emotions. I sat there for a long time after she left, my coffee growing cold, my thoughts a jumbled mess. Part of me wanted to run after her, to take her in my arms and tell her all was forgiven. But the other part, the part that still ached from betrayal and lies, held me back. I needed time to think, to be sure that whatever decision I made was the right one for both of us. Over the next few days, I found myself replaying our conversation in my head constantly. Lily's words, her tears, the sincerity in her eyes, it all haunted me. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she had truly changed, but the fear of being hurt again kept me hesitant. I threw myself into work even more than before, staying at the office until the cleaning staff kicked me out each night. My colleagues started to notice, shooting me concerned glances and making not-so-subtle suggestions that I should take some time off. It was Tom who finally cornered me about a week after my meeting with Lily. "All right, man," he said, barging into my office and closing the door behind him. "Enough is enough. What's going on with you?" I looked up from my computer, blinking in surprise. "What do you mean?" Tom rolled his eyes. "Don't play dumb, David. You've been walking around like a zombie for weeks, and now you're practically living at the office. Talk to me." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "It's complicated." "It's Lily, isn't it?" Tom asked, his voice softening. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Tom pulled up a chair, sitting across from me. "What happened? Did you guys talk?" Slowly, haltingly, I told him about my meeting with Lily. As I spoke, I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying start to ease. It felt good to finally voice my thoughts, my fears. When I finished, Tom was quiet for a moment, considering. "So, what are you going to do?" he finally asked. I shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe her, to give us another chance." But you're scared," Tom finished for me. "Yeah," I admitted. "What if I let her back in and she hurts me again? What if this is just another act?" Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. "David, let me ask you something. In all the years you've known Lily, has she ever given you reason to doubt her before this?" I thought back over our relationship. The good times, the bad times, the everyday moments in between. "No," I said slowly. "She's always been honest, always been there for me." "And in the time you've been apart, has she done anything to make you think she's not serious about wanting to make things right?" I shook my head. "No, she's been respectful of my space. No grand gestures, no public pleas on social media. Just that one meeting where she laid it all out." Tom nodded. "So maybe, just maybe, she's telling the truth. Maybe she really did get caught up in something and lost her way for a bit. But now she's found her way back." His words hit me hard. Had I been so focused on my hurt and anger that I'd been blind to the possibility of genuine remorse and change? "I'm not saying you should just forget everything that happened," Tom continued. "Trust needs to be rebuilt. But David, man, I've seen you these past few weeks. You're miserable without her. Is holding on to your anger really worth losing the love of your life?" I sat there, stunned by the simple truth of his words. Tom stood up, clapping me on the shoulder. "Think about it," he said. "And for God's sake, go home at a reasonable hour tonight. You look like hell." With that, he left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, for the first time in weeks, I left the office at 6 p.m. Instead of going back to Tom's place, where I'd been staying, I found myself driving to the park where Lily and I used to go for picnics on sunny weekends. As I walked along the familiar paths, memories wash over me. Lily laughing as she tried to fly a kite, her hair whipping around her face in the wind. The two of us sprawled on a blanket, reading books and occasionally sharing interesting passages. A surprise birthday picnic she'd arranged, complete with all my favorite foods, and a small group of our closest friends. I found myself at our favorite spot, a small hill overlooking a pond. As I sat down on the grass, I pulled out my phone and stared at Lily's contact information. My thumb hovered over the call button as I wrestled with my conflicting emotions. Finally, taking a deep breath, I pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as I was about to lose my nerve and hang up, Lily's voice came through, soft and hesitant. "David." "Hi, Lily," I said, my voice rougher than I'd intended. I think we need to talk. Really talk." There was a pause, and I could hear her breath catch. "Okay," she said. "Where and when?" "Can you meet me at our spot in the park?" "Now." "I'll be there in 20 minutes," she replied, a note of hope in her voice. As I waited, I watched the sun begin to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The beauty of it all struck me, and I realized how long it had been since I'd taken the time to appreciate moments like this. Had I been so caught up in work and my own pain that I'd forgotten how to live? I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Lily approaching. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked beautiful in her simplicity, reminding me of the girl I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Hi," she said softly, sitting down beside me, maintaining a respectful distance. "Hi," I replied, suddenly unsure of what to say despite having called this meeting. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the pond's surface. Finally, I spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my eyes still on the water. "About us, about everything that's happened." Lily nodded, staying quiet, letting me continue. "What you did, it hurt me, Lily, more than I think you realize. The lies, the sneaking around, it shook everything I thought I knew about our relationship." I'd heard her intake of breath, sharp and pained, but I pressed on. "But I've also been thinking about our life together, all the good times, the challenges we've faced and overcome. And I realized something." I turned to look at her then, meeting her eyes. They were shimmering with unshed tears. "I realize that I don't want to lose you," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I don't want to throw away everything we've built because of one mistake, no matter how big." Lily's eyes widened, hope blooming on her face. "David," I held up a hand, needing to finish. "But I need you to understand something. If we're going to move forward, if we're going to rebuild what we had, there can't be any more secrets. No more lies, no matter how small. I need to be able to trust you completely." Lily nodded vigorously, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Yes, of course. David, I promise you no more secrets. I want to be completely open with you about everything." I reached out, tentatively taking her hand in mine. "It's not going to be easy," I warned. "We have a lot of work to do to rebuild the trust between us, but I'm willing to try if you are." Lily squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with a mixture of tears and hope. "I am," she said fervently. "I'll do whatever it takes, David. I love you, and I want to make this work." For the first time in weeks, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. "I love you too, Lily." We sat there as the last light faded from the sky, talking more openly and honestly than we had in months. Lily told me about her insecurities, a fear of being seen as just David's wife, rather than her own person. I shared my own fears of not being enough for her, of holding her back from her dreams. As we talked, I felt the wall between us slowly start to crumble. It wasn't gone completely, there was still a lot of work to be done, but it was a start. When the night air grew chilly, we stood up, still holding hands. "Do you want to come home?" I asked softly. Lily's face lit up. More than anything. As we walked back to the car, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were moving in the right direction. The drive home was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. There was a sense of anticipation, of new beginnings, that filled the car. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw Lily take a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "Are you okay?" I asked, turning off the engine. She nodded, giving me a small smile. "Just a little nervous. It feels like coming home for the first time, all over again." I understood exactly what she meant. As we walked to the front door, I felt a mix of familiarity and strangeness. This was our home, filled with our shared memories, but it also felt like we were stepping into new territory. I unlocked the door and we stepped inside. The house was exactly as I'd left it weeks ago, but it felt different somehow. Emptier, despite all our belongings still being in place. Lily stood in the entryway, looking around as if seeing the place for the first time. "It feels different," she said softly, echoing my thoughts. I nodded, setting my keys down on the side table. "Yeah, it does." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, neither of us quite sure what to do next. It was Lily who finally broke the silence. "I'm going to make some tea," she said. "Would you like some?" "That sounds good," I replied, grateful for the familiar routine. As Lily busied herself in the kitchen, I wandered into the living room. My eyes were drawn to the photos on the mantel, snapshots of our life together. Our wedding day, vacations, family gatherings. I picked up one of us on our honeymoon, grinning widely at the camera, the ocean stretching out behind us. I remember that day, Lily's voice came from behind me. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, 2 steaming mugs in her hands. "You insisted on climbing to the top of that cliff for the perfect shot, even though we were both terrified of heights." I chuckled at the memory. "Yeah, and then we couldn't figure out how to get back down. We ended up scooting down on our butts." Lily laughed, the sound warming something inside me. "We were covered in dirt and scratches, but you said it was worth it for the view." "It was," I said softly, looking at her. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the connection we used to have. She handed me a mug, and we sat down on the couch, leaving a small space between us. As we sipped our tea, the initial awkwardness began to fade, replaced by a tentative comfort. "So," I said, setting my mug down on the coffee table, "where do we go from here?" Lily took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about that a lot. I'd like to start seeing a marriage counselor. If you're open to it, that is." I nodded slowly. The idea had crossed my mind as well. "I think that's a good idea. We could use some help navigating all of this." Relief washed over Lily's face. "I'm glad you agree. I've already done some research and found a few therapists who specialize in rebuilding trust in relationships. We could look at their profiles together and choose one we both feel comfortable with." Her proactiveness surprised me, but in a good way. It showed me that she was serious about making this work. "That sounds great," I said. "Maybe we could do that tomorrow." "Tonight, I think we both need some rest." Lily nodded, a small yawn escaping her. "You're right. It's been an emotional day." We finished our tea in comfortable silence. As we stood to head to bed, another awkward moment descended. We'd been sleeping apart for weeks. Should we share a bed tonight? Lily seemed to sense my hesitation. "I can sleep in the guest room if you prefer," she offered quietly. I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "No, it's okay. This is your home too. We can share the bed." The smile she gave me was grateful and a little shy. "Okay, thank you, David." As we got ready for bed, moving around each other in the familiar dance of our nightly routine, I felt a mix of emotions. There was still hurt and uncertainty, but also a growing sense of hope. When we finally slipped under the covers, lying on our respective sides of the bed, I felt the warmth of Lily's presence beside me. It was comforting and unsettling all at once. "Good night, David," Lily whispered in the darkness. "Good night, Lily," I replied softly. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder what the coming days and weeks would bring. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the kitchen. For a moment, I was disoriented, the familiar scents and sounds clashing with the memory of the past weeks spent alone. Then it all came rushing back. The park, our conversation, the decision to try again. I got up and made my way to the kitchen, where I found Lily at the stove, making pancakes. She turned when she heard me enter, a tentative smile on her face. "Good morning," she said. "I hope you don't mind, I thought I'd made breakfast." "It smells great," I replied, moving to pour myself a cup of coffee. "Thanks." We ate breakfast together, the conversation stilted at first, but gradually becoming more natural. As we cleared the dishes, Lily brought up the topic of marriage counseling again. "I was thinking we could look at those therapist profiles this morning if you're free," she suggested. I nodded. "Yeah, that sounds good. I don't have any meetings until this afternoon." We spent the next hour reviewing different therapists' credentials and approaches. It was a surreal experience, sitting side by side on the couch with our laptops, discussing which stranger might be best equipped to help us save our marriage. But it also felt productive, like we were taking concrete steps towards healing. Finally, we settled on a therapist named Dr. Emily Chen. Her approach focused on rebuilding trust through open communication and setting clear boundaries, which resonated with both of us. "I'll give her office a call and see when she can fit us in," Lily said, jotting down the number. As she made the call, I found myself studying her. She looked both familiar and different, the same Lily I'd always known, but with a new determination in her eyes. I realized that despite everything that had happened, I still loved her deeply. The thought both comforted and terrified me. Lily hung up the phone and turned to me with a smile. "We're in luck. Dr. Chen had a cancellation and can see us tomorrow afternoon. Is that okay with your schedule?" I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "Yeah, I can make that work." The rest of the day passed in a blur of work and nervous anticipation. That night, as we lay in bed, I could feel the tension radiating from Lily. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" I asked softly. She was quiet for a moment before responding. "Yes," she admitted. "I'm scared, David. What if we can't fix this?" I reached out in the darkness, finding her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "We won't know unless we try. And I think the fact that we're both willing to try is a good sign." I felt her relax slightly at my touch. "You're right. Thank you for being willing to do this, David. It means more than I can say." The next day, we sat side by side in Dr. Chen's waiting room, both of us fidgeting nervously. When the door opened and Dr. Chen called us in, I felt Lily take a deep breath beside me. Dr. Chen's office was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. As we sat down, she smiled at us kindly. "David, Lily, thank you for coming in today," she said. "I know taking this step can be daunting, but it's an important one. Why don't we start by having each of you tell me a bit about why you're here and what you hope to achieve through counseling?" Lily and I exchanged a glance, silently deciding who should go first. Finally, I cleared my throat and began to speak. "We've been having some trust issues," I said, feeling the inadequacy of the words as soon as they left my mouth. Lily, she kept some things from me, made some choices that hurt our relationship. But we want to try to work through it, to rebuild what we had. Dr. Chen nodded encouragingly. "That's a good start, David. Can you tell me more about how these trust issues have affected you personally?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the emotions I'd been carrying. It's like the ground was pulled out from under me. I thought I knew who we were as a couple, who Lily was as a person. Finding out she'd been hiding things, living this whole other life. It made me question everything. Every memory, every moment we shared. I started wondering if any of it was real. I felt Lily stiffen beside me, but I pressed on. I've been angry, hurt, confused. There are moments when I look at her and all I can see is a betrayal. But then there are other times when I remember all the good we've shared and I want that back. I want to trust her again, but I don't know how. Dr. Chen listened attentively, nodding as I spoke. When I finished, she turned to Lily. And Lily, how do you feel hearing David express this? Lily's voice was thick with emotion when she responded. It breaks my heart to hear how much I've hurt him. I never meant for any of this to happen. I got caught up in something that I thought was harmless at first, and by the time I realized how far I'd gone, I was in too deep. I was scared to tell David the truth because I knew it would hurt him. But by trying to protect him, I ended up causing even more pain. She paused, wiping away a tear. I want to make this right. I want David to be able to trust me again. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild what we had. Dr. Chen smiled gently at both of us. Thank you both for your honesty. It's clear that there's still a lot of love between you, and that's a strong foundation to build upon. Over the next few sessions, we're going to work on rebuilding trust through open communication and setting clear boundaries. It won't be easy, and there will likely be some difficult moments. But if you're both committed to the process, I believe we can make progress. As we left Dr. Chen's office that day, I felt a mix of emotions: hope, fear, determination. Lily and I walked to the car in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. That was intense, Lily said as we buckled our seatbelts. I nodded, starting the car. Yeah, it was, but I think it was good. Necessary. Lily reached over and squeezed my hand. Thank you for being willing to do this, David. I know it's not easy. I gave her a small smile. It's not, but you're worth it. We're worth it. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions as we continued our sessions with Dr. Chen and worked on rebuilding our relationship at home. There were good days when it felt like we were making progress, rediscovering the connection that had brought us together in the first place. But there were also difficult days when old hurts resurfaced and trust felt impossible. One particularly challenging moment came about a month into our counseling. We were having dinner at home, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, when Lily's phone buzzed with a text message. I saw her glance at it and quickly turned the phone face down. Who was that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but feeling a familiar surge of suspicion. Lily looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. It was just a work thing. Nothing important. I felt my jaw clench. If it's nothing important, why did you hide it? Lily sighed, running a hand through her hair. I wasn't hiding it, David. I just didn't want to be rude and check my phone during dinner. But you did check it, I pointed out, my voice rising slightly. And then you turned it over so I couldn't see. That seems like hiding to me. Lily's eyes flashed with anger. Do you want to read all my text now? Is that what it's going to take for you to trust me? I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. Maybe it is. How am I supposed to trust you when you're still acting secretive? We stood there, glaring at each other across the table, the tension thick in the air. Then suddenly, Lily's shoulders slumped. You're right, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have reacted that way. Here. She picked up her phone and held it out to me. You can read it if you want. I stared at the phone for a long moment, conflicting emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to grab it, to finally have proof one way or the other. But another part, the part that still believed in us, held me back. Slowly, I shook my head. No, I said, my voice rough. I don't want to read your texts. I want to be able to trust you without needing to check up on you. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I want that too, David. I'm trying, I really am. But sometimes I still mess up. I'm so scared of doing the wrong thing that I end up making it worse. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I know, I'm trying too. It's hard. We stood there in silence for a moment, the tension slowly dissipating. Finally, Lily spoke again. "It was from Jack," she said quietly. "Mr. Wilson. He was asking if I'd reconsider coming back to work for the company." I felt a jolt of surprise and a flicker of the old jealousy. "Oh," I said, not sure how to respond. Lily looked at me earnestly. "I was going to tell you about it after dinner. I didn't want to ruin our meal. And for the record, I'm not interested in going back. That chapter of my life is closed." I nodded slowly, processing her words. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "I appreciate your honesty." We cleaned up dinner in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. As we finished loading the dishwasher, Lily turned to me. "Can we talk about this more?" she asked hesitantly. "I feel like we need to address what just happened." I agreed, and we moved to the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. For the next hour, we had one of the most honest conversations we'd had since starting counseling. We talked about our fears, our insecurities, and our hopes for the future. It was painful at times, but also cathartic. By the end of the night, we'd both felt drained, but also closer. As we got ready for bed, Lily paused in the bathroom doorway. "David," she said softly, "I love you, and I'm not giving up on us." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. "I love you too, Lily, and neither am I." As the weeks turned into months, we continued to work on our relationship, both in counseling and at home. There were still difficult moments, times when the old hurt threatened to overwhelm us. But there were also moments of joy, of rediscovery. One Saturday morning, about 6 months into our counseling, I woke up to find Lily's side of the bed empty. Curious, I got up and wandered downstairs. I found her in the kitchen, surrounded by a mess of flour and batter, cursing under her breath. "What's going on?" I asked, taking the scene with amusement. Lily looked up, her face streaked with flour. "I was trying to make those cinnamon rolls you love," she said, a note of frustration in her voice. "The ones your mom used to make, but I think I've ruined them." I felt a surge of affection for her. "Let me see," I said, moving closer to inspect the damage. The dough was indeed a bit of a disaster, but it wasn't beyond saving. "Here, let me help." Together, we salvaged the dough, rolled it out, and got the cinnamon rolls into the oven. As we cleaned up the kitchen, laughing at the mess we'd made, I realized something. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about the past, about the hurt and betrayal. I was just enjoying the moment, enjoying being with Lily. As we sat down to enjoy our slightly misshapen but delicious cinnamon rolls, Lily reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" I asked, confused. "For not giving up on us," she replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "For being willing to work through this with me. For moments like this." I squeezed her hand, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Thank you for the same," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. From that day on, things between Lily and me continued to improve. We still had our ups and downs, but we were better equipped to handle them. Our communication had improved significantly, and we were both committed to maintaining the trust we'd worked so hard to rebuild. About a year after we started counseling, Lily came to me with an idea. She wanted to start her own small fashion consulting business, helping women find their personal style without the pressure and glitz of the high fashion world. I was fully supportive, and together we worked on her business plan. As Lily's business grew, I found myself falling in love with her all over again. Watching her pursue her passion in a way that aligned with our values and our relationship made me incredibly proud. She was flourishing, and our relationship was stronger than ever. On our wedding anniversary, 2 years after the Halloween incident that had nearly torn us apart, I surprised Lily with a weekend getaway to the beach where we'd honeymooned. As we stood on the same cliff where we'd taken that photo years ago, I turned to her. "Lily," I said, taking her hands in mine, "these past couple of years have been the hardest of my life, but they've also been the most rewarding. We've faced our demons, we've fought for our love, and we've come out stronger. I love you more now than I ever have before." Tears were streaming down Lily's face as she replied, "Oh, David, I love you too, more than I can ever express." We renewed our vows right there on that cliff, with only the ocean as our witness. As we kissed, sealing our recommitment to each other, I knew that whatever challenges life might throw our way, we'd face them together. Our story wasn't perfect. We'd made mistakes, we'd hurt each other, we'd nearly lost everything. We'd also fought for our love, we'd done the hard work of rebuilding trust, and we rediscovered the joy of being together. As we drove home from our weekend away, Lali's hand in mine, I felt a deep sense of peace. The road hadn't been easy, but it had led us here, stronger, wiser, and more in love than ever before. And for that, I was profoundly grateful.